Away, everyone! Away!
In his house in Relia, Dead Cthulhu waits streaming.
You ever played D&D before?
No.
What kind of character do you play?
I play a cultist.
But you are a cultist.
I'm growing gills. Gills! My transformation into a deep one has finally begun. Father Dagon be praised.
Rob, we don't see any gills.
The coffee-drinking cultists who meet under the pavilion. I can bring them to you.
Did you not bring them to me within 3 days? Then you're back on the menu. Got it?
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
It's the cultists of the Yellow King. We're being infiltrated.
I need a spell to kill Steve.
That escalated.
Kill, kill, kill!
What happened? They'll fall fast asleep, and I'll take them to the cult of Shub.
Were you trying to slip us a Mickey?
As soon as I learn this spell, you are done for.
It's like Twilight, but with a fish.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Morning Grind. Still kind of in its experimental stage here. We're trying to experiment. I'm experimenting with some live streams here where we talk about different things in tabletop and fantasy every morning. Access Your Inner Light says, "Morning, beautiful." Why, thank you very much, and good morning to you as well. So today we are going to be talking about the Fate core rules. We're doing a bit of a read through on it, and then also some discussion of its points. I'd really like to know what you think. Fate happens to be one of the role-playing games that I think about the most when I'm thinking about, some kind of design for my own in some way. But it almost gets there, in my opinion. I didn't really understand it when I first read through it, which I think is something that a lot of people probably have. But then I was able to play with somebody who really did understand the core rules and did a wonderful time, did a wonderful job teaching it and also playing with it, really understood what it was trying to do. And so once I had played with him, then of course I went back and read the rules. He did a fantastic job. Then I went back and read the rules and tried to understand what it was trying to do. And to me, it kind of gets there. It comes close to what I would be trying to do now with a narrative RPG that is somewhat rules light and that lets the story be driven. And we've got this phrase, simulating storytelling. And actually, I've used that phrase before. And in the comment section on YouTube, some people were wondering, why are we worried about simulating storytelling? Aren't we actually trying to tell a story? And so we could probably have a lot deeper discussion on what it means to tell a story or to simulate telling a story using an RPG. But I think that Fate is a good one to do that. And as I have gotten, Fate was the first RPG I read like this. But I've got the Cortex RPG over there, sitting over there in hardback form that I need to look at. And then also Savage Worlds. I read through Savage Worlds as well, because I was recommended Savage Worlds when I was trying to see, telling people what I was trying to do. People said also read Savage Worlds. So it seems like to me there is at least some section of the gaming community who is going toward something like what Fate, Cortex, and Savage Worlds is trying to do. Cortex seems like it does it in the most crunchy rules heavy way, actually. So maybe Fate is, or could be the lightest, certainly, if you're looking at different versions of Fate that are scaled down, which I do enjoy, like the Fate, it's not called light, I don't think, but the one that just has the approaches in it, where all skill, there are no skills or attributes, it's all approaches. That's actually a lot of fun, and it's also the most right way. Access Your Inner Light says, Savage Worlds has always confused me, but there is a beautiful sword and sorcery setting for it called Beasts and Barbarians. I have got to, I want to go over Savage Worlds again. It's probably been a little while since I've read it, and I've never played it. But when I read it, I did understand why people were recommending it to me, because it was seeming to do a lot of the things that seemed, like I said, similar in this direction for this kind of role-playing game that I think Fate and Cortex is also trying to do. And I haven't heard of Beasts and Barbarians. I'll have to check that out. All right, so a few announcements here. Happy All Saints Day to everybody. This is November 1st. This is All Saints Day. It's also the first day of NaNoWriMo. You may see people posting about that online. NaNoWriMo is the National Novel Writing Month. This is the first day of the National Novel Writing Month. And that's when people try to write 50,000 words in 30 days in their novel or their stories. And I was really trying to participate this year, and I still might, because I have got a lot of writing to do. Because like I said, some of you may know, I've got the RPG side, but I have been working on stories for a while. And I realized I'm just having to separate the RPG development for the worlds and also the stories. So I had, here is a whole index card stack of stuff that's been going on with one of the stories. I've got several of them, but I've been trying to lay out a story because I find that one of the most difficult things when I sit down to write is knowing what to write. And sometimes that sounds weird to people. You're like, wait a minute, you're writing this story or this book or whatever. Don't you know what to write? Well, unless you have the structure laid out, I believe in outlining the structure. You know, a lot of writing time is actually spent trying to figure out what the story is. So I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go down and work with my index cards, get the story down so that maybe this year, I don't know. I got to make that call. I was planning on doing NaNoWriMo and trying to get to 50,000 words. That would really help getting 50,000 words of a story. But I didn't quite get there on the index cards. But I might have enough to start on Act 1 of the story. So we will see. This Friday, so we took care of that. This Friday, The Cultists Season 2, Episode 5 will be premiering on Friday, 7:30 p.m. Central Time here on this channel. We've had a great time premiering The Cultists. If you don't know, The Cultists is our Lovecraftian web show, our comedy web show about modern day cultists who are just trying to worship Cthulhu in a world full of people who don't understand. And we have shot 2 seasons of that. Each season has 10 episodes. They're all 5 to 7 minutes long. And so episode 2 has been premiering here on Friday nights on the channel, and it has been a lot of fun. Episode 5 of season 2 is coming out this Friday. And then afterwards, we do an after party where I hang out either here myself or with other members of the cast and crew, because Brianna De Silva, the co-writer and director, has been hanging out with me the last couple of Friday nights. And last Friday night, we had Dax Rocker, who plays Rob. That's the guy with the fish on the side of his head. Also, and I hope they're both able to return this Friday. Maybe we might get somebody else as well, because then we go over the episode, do behind the scenes discussion, and it's a lot of fun. And I've been giving away board game and RPG stuff. So this week, this is the prize. This is War of Kings. This is the first board game that I designed and published with my brother. This is a game of kingdom building and conquest. It's kind of like a cross between Settlers of Catan and Risk. Not only do you build out your kingdom, but you can also raise armies to go and burn down somebody else's village if they built where you want to build. You can watch the trailers and how to play and things like that here on this channel as well. You must be present on the live stream on Friday, the after party, to win. So that's coming up. So hang out with us on Friday. The way that we are funding, we have got a new board game coming out very soon, and that is called Ritual. Let me go over here and show you. I need a. Hang on. I don't like that I can't prep more than one screen to show. This is Ritual. Let me put the link right down here. Ritual is coming to GameFound. This is a social deduction Cthulhu board game that we have designed to complement the Cultists. And so if you go there, oh, now I can put up the stream. There we go. So this is Ritual. It is a social deduction board game where you play a group of cultists trying to cast spells, and you have been infiltrated by the cult of the Yellow King. And I've also have miniatures from the cultist right here. So this game, you're trying to cast 5 different rituals or rites, and if the Cult of the Yellow King can follow you up 2 or 3 times, then the Cult of the Yellow King wins, and you're trying to figure out who among your cult is actually secretly agents of the Yellow King. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you click that link and come over here to follow, you can see that 1,098 people have already decided to follow this board game, and I really appreciate it. If you click that, then you'll get the updates. I can even send out some updates before we go live, which will be in about 2 weeks, to let everybody know the status and things like that. And then you can also check out the game trailer, all of the miniatures. If you follow the game, then you get a High Priest of Dagon miniature free when you back the game. And you can also see a little bit about how to play here. And so if you would like to follow there, that would be great. But I'm also going to give you a sign-up link right here for the cultists, which will put you on the mailing list right here. So I put a sign up right there, and then I've been sending out emails like on Fridays to the cultists list to remind you that we got the show coming out on Fridays, and then we also have the giveaway and stuff like that. So that's what's going on with Ritual, and we hope to be able to raise enough money on GameFound to not only produce the game, put all of that into production, but then also to be able to fund season 3 of the Cultists. We'd really like to be able to do 3 seasons of the Cultists. We kind of designed it as a 3-season arc. We did season 1. After we did season 1, we realized we really would love to be able to do more. And so we started writing the season 2 scripts and kind of thought season 2 and season 3 kind of as one continuous kind of chunk. So we got through season 2. We've already written the scripts for season 3. So if you're enjoying it, Ritual, that board game, is how we are trying to make that happen. So please hang out with us there. All right, let's get toward the role-playing stuff here. Let me pull back up then Fate Core. Okay, there we go. So one thing that I've got to make a call on very soon, and kind of why I am working on going through all these RPG things now, is because I realized, like I said, I've got to separate my story from creating my worlds and creating the RPGs that are going to be inside those same worlds. I got the stories and the RPGs and the games inside the same world. And, of course, there are 2 ways that you can go if you're trying to do RPGs. You can create your own RPG system, or you can use an existing one that also has, of course, the correct licenses and things like that so that you can publish it. I have written RPG books before. I wrote some very serious Lovecraft and Call of Cthulhu themed RPG books for the world Journey to the Tree of Sorrows. Some of you may have heard of that because that was the world I was developing with David LaRocca, the Lovecraftian world, when I was with Infinite Black. I wrote those books, and David has those. They have not been published yet, but he's had them. And then I have gone on to try to work on my own worlds. But he made the call on Journey to the Tree of Sorrows that we should use the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons rules. So, because we thought about, do we use Fate? We actually experimented with using Fate for that. Then we tried to experiment with, well, if we were trying to do our own, what would we build out? But trying to build out the rules, the world, and write the world book and all of that is a very large task. Of course, trying to design your own RPG system is also its very big task. So for those reasons, we made the call to go with 5th edition. But then also, there is the business side of that. 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is probably the system that most people on the planet are most familiar with. And so there are good, business reasons to say, here's my new world. It's compatible with 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. What do you think about that? Do you have, do you have a preference for these kinds of things? Do you want them to be 5th edition, or should we move on? Like, what system would you use? Like I said, I'm trying to go for a more narrative, rules light, story driven kind of role playing experience. But I do understand the business reasons to go with 5th edition. But I also wondered, is it possible to do both? Like, if you had your own system that's really working the way that you want it, can't you put, like, in a box compatible with 5th edition and then also have, the rules that that have been developed specifically for this world? Access Your Inner Light says, I'm biased because I'm developing my own system. And I think that a lot of people here are trying to do that as well, because we did a breakdown on this channel of a whole lot of the math and graphics behind the D20 and different systems for action resolution in an RPG. And I think that attracted lots of people who were interested in the math because they were working on their own systems. But of course, that does double up the work. If you're trying to build the world and the system, you're doubling up on all the work. But since I've got to start working on these RPG worlds in order to get them done, I got to make that call soon about whether or not I'm making a system or I'm trying to adapt something that already exists. Access Your Inner Light says, if I did make it compatible with something else, it would probably be OSR. That's a pretty good choice too. There's something about the old school system that does make it feels like you could be running a game that's got very disposable characters, and you can go into terrible situations in dungeons and things like that, and get them killed. We should probably go over OSR on this channel. I'm going to make a note of that because that's another one that we could look at. But since I have to make this call pretty fast, I decided I would go back and review a bunch of different systems. And I might as well do that live online as part of the morning grind. Oh, you have your coffee, by the way. I'm drinking out of the Cultist coffee mug. Actually, the Witch's Brew coffee mug today. This is the one that's the Witch's Brew. It's kind of based on the Starbucks logo. And it's available over at ravenkeep.net. But I've actually kind of challenged myself to say, could I write what I would want out of an RPG in about 10,000 words? Rather than trying to write a whole core book or something like that, could I write what I want out of, especially an action resolution mechanic? Because the core to me of the RPG is, how do you resolve actions? All RPGs always start with, here's how you make a character. But like I said, I think it's arguable whether or not making a character is part of the game. To me, the game is playing with your character. Now, it can be fun to make characters. It absolutely can be fun, and we can enjoy that. But if you ask me, hey, let's sit down and play an RPG, and then all we do is make characters, have we played the RPG? I'm going to say no. So I want to know, how do you actually play the game, and what would I do? And then maybe I can make a call as to whether or not I expand it. But give myself a word limit, something like 10,000 words, and what could I create in that? So in this, I wanted to go ahead and look at Fate Core here and kind of refresh myself on it. Let me see. I might need to bring up the table of contents. Yeah, that might help. Access Your Inner Light says, I think there's something to understand game balance and how characters are created. Yeah, we could talk about game balance. What I found, one of the reasons I was thinking about doing action mechanics first is because, if you start designing, now I was talking about the order of the books and the way it presents information, but if you start designing a character, your character design first, designing your character design system first, I can think of all different kinds of things that I might want to stat out for the characters. Oh, we could do this with the character, and then we could have this type of statistic, and then we could have these kinds of secondary statistics that are designed in this way. But I don't know exactly how the game's played yet, so I don't know exactly what's necessary. Am I putting in a whole bunch of stuff that isn't necessary? That was my thinking. So if I understood how the game was actually going to be played, then I could say, all right, that's the system about how the game's played. How would you design a character, and what kind of statistics do you need to play that game and to use these mechanics? That was my thinking, because I can think of all kinds of neat things you might want to know about a character. But whether or not it's all relevant is not knowable, if you're just doing the character creation part or designing that first. Okay, so welcome to Fate. Now, there's no default setting, but I do like this. Fate is about proactive, capable people leading dramatic lives. And I do appreciate that, and I think that's a good thing to start off with, because we may all have had the experience, or many people may have had the experience, where somebody is playing a character and they want to be a recluse, right? No, I'm just the wizard who researches spells in the tower. Well, okay. I mean, you could be that, but then you might not be the kind of person who's actually going on an adventure. So I appreciate that Fate Core starts off with the idea that these are proactive, capable people leading dramatic lives. If you're not planning on playing that, there's probably a different game for you, right? But this one is telling you that, hey, our characters are going to be capable and they're actually going to be going out and doing something. Of course, Fate uses custom dice. How do we feel about that? I don't mind. You know, there's a lot to be said for the polyhedral dice because they are available everywhere. But as I was working through my action resolution system, I actually came to the point that maybe in order to do what I need to do, I also need custom dice. Maybe. But I don't really think that's terrible because we don't want to shoehorn ourselves into the D4, D6, D8, D12, D20 system because that does limit what you can do. If you have more options because of your dice generation system, you may be able to do different things and potentially do better things. So Fate Dice came up with this, and this is a bell curve system. It's got the 0 for the blank, basically a -1 for a minus. The plus is +1, and then you're adding up the numbers that are generated along a bell curve in order to add to your skill number. Now, one of the things that I found out in all of the analysis that we did in the other videos, they're on a playlist here about the D20s and how they work, is that it wasn't actually the bell curve that was really changing things the way I wanted to change things, because that surprised me, because I thought that one of the problems with the D20 system was that the D20 is just so random with every number equally probable. It would be better if we generated a bell curve with like 2D10. We looked at that, all the math behind that on the channel already. And even some variations of Dungeons & Dragons already recommends that. And we found those in Unearthed Arcana and how it was talking about how that changes the game. But as it turns out, it was more about the range of values in the D20 rather than how we generate those numbers. And so I prefer, I suppose I prefer a bell curve system over one that where all numbers are equally likely. But actually, now that I go back and look at Fate, I'm going, I wonder if the bell curve system is actually doing what we want it to do rather than using a different system. And I just about have my alternative system kind of worked out. We'll probably go over it on a live stream like this. Let's go over here. Yes, understand game mechanics, then create a character. Yeah, that's what I think. Access Inner Light says, I'm going with custom dice for my game too. Just designed custom D12s to replace the custom D6s I was using previously because I wanted to simplify the combat skill system into the combat and skill systems into a single system. Yeah, I hear you. And I've been trying to come up with a way so that combat and skills are resolved in the same way too. It always seems like combat's a special case. There seems to be like for instance, I really wanted to not have too many combat skills, but on the other hand, it seems like people want to fight in RPGs, and in order to get a little bit of extra differentiation between kinds of characters, I've started even last night kind of going in the other direction, going, well, maybe I do need a few more that are just dedicated to combat in order to differentiate it. Okay, fate points. These are well, it doesn't say exactly what they are right here. It doesn't give me a definition right here. It goes to 12. Let me see if I can go over here to 12. So fate points. Fate points are a measure of how much influence you have to make the story go in your character's favor. And I have generally been in favor of the system like this. Of course, these fate points are really what drives Fate. One of the problems that I found when I was playing Fate with people who hadn't played Fate before was that people tended to be very protective of their fate points and not wanting to spend them. But fate works best if fate points are flowing around the table and you really get a good economy of them going. I think part of that has to do with their name, because one of the other players I was playing with said, no, if I get a fate point, I mean, a fate point, that's a huge thing. I want to save that until it really, really matters. I suppose because the word fate is, you know, the fate of your character or something like that. Whereas actually it's not in this. It's you're intended to use quite a few of them, get them and lose them within scenes, And that really what drives that. And if you understand that, you end up playing better games of Fate. If you don't, and everybody's like, oh, I need to save these Fate points until it really, really matters, the game isn't going to work the way that you want it to. Index cards for recording aspects during play. You know, I actually got these. I recommend these. These are blank cards that have the surface on them for wet or dry erase markers. And I think this is a great thing. You could just use index cards, but I like these because you can just use wet or dry erase markers on them as the game master, and you can write on them, and then you can put them out on the table and then change them or make additional notes or things like that. I think that's a really cool addition to Fate. Let's go down here. Now, okay, we can take a look at the character sheet, okay, because I do appreciate that it's not complicated, right? You've got your name, description. Okay, the word aspects. Oh, we got the word aspects right here. Aspects are phrases that describe some significant detail about your character. I think aspects is a weird word. I think this is another thing that prevents people from really getting into Fate, because for some reason, I think when we're using this word, aspect, it tends to invoke some idea about magic. Like I think of aspected magic or something from GURPS when I think of aspects in the context of an RPG. Now, I do realize that, okay, we're talking about different, it's a different use of this word that I think confuses people, especially when you talk about later, yeah, we're going to invoke aspects. That sounds like something magical to me. You're going to invoke an aspect, but that's not really what we're talking about here. We're going to use, instead of invoke, we're going to use some significant detail about the character. We're going to use some character's trait. But the terminology here in Fate is that we are going to invoke an aspect, okay? And I think that confuses people. Aspects are like traits. They're features. That might be a better word. I realize that they're trying to come up with a word that can describe these significant details about characters, but also rooms, situations, vehicles, even worlds, because of the Fate fractal, where everything can be described using these aspects, and from your character all the way up to the world. So they're trying to come up with a word that is encompassing about that. They ended up with aspects, but when you're just trying to teach somebody this game, invoking aspects is not something that's intuitive to people. They're probably trying to access your inner light. Says they're probably trying to use words that won't get copyright stricken. Well, that could be too. But a character trait, a character feature, I'm not sure that those would have been copyright stricken. I don't know. But nonetheless, I do like this way of designing a character, that you've got certain things. This allows character generation to go quickly. And I like it when character generation goes quickly because, we can create one in 15 minutes. So if you're here at a 2 or 2.5 hour session and you got to create a character, you can do it in 15 minutes and then you can get playing. And you can also create the kind of character you want to play. You're not always having to be a level 1 character. I realize you can create things at higher levels, but you're not creating a level 1 character. If you want to play Aragorn, as my example, you can create Aragorn directly in Fate in 15 minutes and it works. And I really like that. Play the character that you want to play. So the aspects describe why your character matters, what we're interested in seeing your character, why we're interested in seeing your character in the game. They can describe personality, description, beliefs, relationships, issues, problems, anything like that. And they can be invoked for a bonus, or they can make life difficult for you by being compelled against you. Okay. And that actually gets you Fate points. So Fate Core uses skills. So you have aspects and then you have skills. And so everything is rolled against one of your different kinds of skills if you're trying to accomplish some type of action. Let's continue. Stunts. See, stunts also mess people up. They did with me. Stunts are special tricks that your character knows that allows you to get an extra benefit out of a skill or alter some other game rule to work in your favor. Stunts are like special moves in a video game, letting you do something unique or distinctive compared to other characters. Two characters can have the same rating in a skill, but their stunts might give them vastly different benefits. Landon has a stunt called Another Round, ? It gives him a bonus to get information from someone with his rapport skill, provided that he is drinking with his target in a tavern. So that's an example of a stunt. So it's like a special way of using a skill. I also do really like consequences, the idea of consequences, because consequences are the other option you have to stay in a conflict. Oh, so stress is actually the first way. Stress right here. Where did I put stress? We saw that right here. Stress is one of the two options you have to avoid losing a conflict. It represents temporary fatigue, getting winded, superficial injuries, and so on. You have a number of stress levels you can burn off to help keep you in a fight, and those reset at the end of a conflict once you've had a moment to rest and catch your breath. So the stress, and you've got both physical stress and mental stress to help you resist being taken out in conflict. So they're kind of analogous to hit points. They're temporary, and you're going to get them back. If you go beyond that, you're going into consequences. Consequences are the other option you have for staying in conflict, but they have a more lasting impact. Every time you take a consequence, it puts a new aspect, so consequences are aspects, on your character sheet describing your injuries. Unlike stress, you have to take time to recover from a consequence, and it's stuck on your character sheet in the meantime, which leaves your character vulnerable to complications or others wishing to take advantage of your new weakness. I do like the whole idea of consequences, and that's because there's been a lot of times that I'm sitting in like 5th edition combat, and I'm wondering, does this combat really matter? And most of the time it doesn't. Now, I realize that here's where you cue endless arguments on Reddit and everywhere else about somebody who's saying, well, if your combat doesn't matter in Dungeons & Dragons, it just means that your game master isn't running it right? That it's the game master's job to make sure that every combat that you enter in Dungeons & Dragons is significant. And I understand why people say that. But on the other hand, the mechanics of the game sort of indicate that a lot of things that you are going to be fighting and doing, I think, are not going to be particularly significant, because you've got a situation where you're relatively easily able to restore hit points, a lot of your character's abilities. So you're not really worried about things getting used up that you're not going to have again next fight. And then also the number of fights that you're supposed to go through in order to advance your character is quite a lot. I mean, how many fights, like fight encounters, are you expected to fight through between going from level 1 to level 20? I don't exactly have a number on it, but being that experience or fights are one of the main ways that you gain experience, well, you're going to be in a lot of them, and you're probably not going to remember them all. But some of the best times that I've had when I've actually been playing are consequential fights that had real consequences, and that were, fought in interesting locations the way we remember those. Those are better fights. I would stop most all of the smaller fights that aren't intended to actually matter, and only have those that really do. And I think that consequences are a great way to do that. You have some temporary stress, but if you go past that, you may have some type of injury or other problem, mental or physical, that might prevent you from continuing, or actually is going to stick with you as being a lasting consequence of being in that fight. So this is taking action. So this is actually how you play right here. Players, some of the things you do in Fate require you to roll dice to see if your character succeeds or not. You will always roll the dice when you're opposing another character with your effort, or when there's a significant obstacle in the way of your effort. Okay, so the most common reasons to use dice in Fate are, and these symbols appear throughout the game as well, to overcome an obstacle. Okay, page 134. To create or unlock an advantage for your character in the form of an aspect you can use. So I think this is also, I think it's a very interesting one, but it's also one that is not very well understood intuitively, I think, when people are reading through the rule book. So one of the things you can roll dice to do is to create or unlock an advantage for your character in the form of an aspect you can use. It also, it's not always completely clear what that means in the rule book, I think, because, well, for example, you could create the advantage, I want to aim my gun at the foe by making him in my sights. So in my sights would be an aspect. I want to try to aim, so I'm going to roll the dice in some way, and now I've got the enemy in my sights. That would be an advantage that I created myself that's going to give me a bonus on a future roll. So it's very important in Fate. It's very important in Fate, but I think sometimes misunderstood and not used very well. You can roll dice to attack, but then you also roll dice to defend. So this is having an active defense system. And generally, I prefer active defense systems because I think that it makes the players, well, I feel like it makes the players more engaged. And that's probably because one of my first games was Hero Quest, and Hero Quest has an active defense system. And I remember being kind of surprised by the fact that Dungeons and Dragons didn't have active defense. So Fate here has active defense. But actually, that may not be good. like you are doubling the amount of dice that you're rolling in a combat situation. You got to roll to attack and to defend. And you have some kind of skill level. We said you'll have skills in Fate Core. And then if you're trying to roll, then you roll all of these dice, add up the positives and negatives, and modify your dice roll by that. Okay, we've got a comment here from Access Your Inner Light. In the system I'm working on, I don't have experience points. Characters, heroes, can change their destiny after having some kind of awesome experience, such as a significant fight. Yes, so like crossing milestones here in Fate does that. I've been thinking about that for what I'm doing as well, because I'm wondering if you really need to do complex experience point counting. I think that using a system like that where you can change your character and modify it after extensive experiences increase, or significant experiences increase skills or change things about the skill, or your character in general, is a really good way to go. Now, the other way that I like is something like in the Call of Cthulhu game. I think it's too much for what I'm trying to do. But, you know, in the Call of Cthulhu, like, you indicate if you used a skill during the course of a session. So the other option that I like for that is that, well, the only way that you get better at things is by using those skills that are on your character sheet. And if you use one then during the game, then you put a check mark by it in Call of Cthulhu, and then they've got to check at the end of the game or at the end of the session to see whether or not you actually leveled up in that skill. And maybe you did go up one. A point. And I do actually like that because it forces you to use skills that you want to get better at. So that's the other system that I like for that. I got concurrence on Inner Defense. Inner Defense. Active Defense by Inner Light. Here's the skill ladder. So here's the different skill points that you've got. Interpreting results. Let's get over here to these fate points. So here is the fate point. And like I said, I like them, but there are some things that I don't think it does quite well that we need to add. So, okay, fate points. You use tokens to represent how many fate points you have at a given time during play. Fate points are one of your most important resources in Fate. They're a measure of how much influence you have to make the story go in your character's favor. You can spend fate points to invoke an aspect, to declare to invoke an aspect, declare a story detail, or activate certain powerful stunts. You earn fate points by accepting a compel on one of your aspects. A compel is when something makes life harder for you. Okay. So most commonly, they are used for invoking aspects. And remember, aspects, invoking an aspect means using a feature of your character, using some kind of special trait of your character. So whenever you're making a skill roll and you're in a situation where you might be able, where an aspect might be able to help you, you can spend a fate point to invoke it in order to change the dice result. This allows you to either re-roll the dice or add +2 to your roll, whichever is more helpful. Typically, +2 is a good choice if you rolled -2 or higher, but sometimes you want to risk a re-roll to get that +4. Once you do this, you've rolled the dice. You do this after you've rolled your dice if you aren't happy with your total. Now, that is a nice thing that, unlike other games where you have to know whether or decide whether you're going to use an aspect and a fate point before you roll, here you can roll, see your result, and go, that's not going to be enough. I need to get this up there, perhaps by using a fate point on aspects. You also have to explain or justify how the aspect is helpful in order to get the bonus. Sometimes it'll be self-evident, and sometimes it might require some creative narrating. You can spend more than one fate point on a single roll, gaining another reroll or a +2, as long as each point you spend invokes different aspects. And so, in order to really get a high roll, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have a whole bunch of aspects, collect them, sometimes made by creating advantages, or often made by creative advantages. And then once you create enough advantages and you have all of the fate points, you cash all of them in, and then you have a gigantic number to accomplish whatever it was that you were trying to do. So let's go through this example just for the heck of it here. Cyrene is trying to covertly goad a merchant into describing the security features of his personal vault by posing as a visiting dignitary. The merchant is giving her passive opposition at good +3, and her deceive skill is fair +2. Lily rolls. I guess that's the player. She breaks even, getting a 0. That leaves her result at fair, not enough to get the information that she wants. She looks at her character sheet and then to Amanda, who I guess is the GM, and says, long years of being tempted by shiny things has taught me a thing or two about what's in a treasure hoard and what's not. I'm going to try to impress this merchant by talking about the rarest, most prized elements of his collection. Amanda grins and nods. Lily hands over a fate point to invoke the aspect and gets +2 to her standing roll. This brings the result to great, which exceeds the opposition. The duly impressed merchant starts to brag about his vault, and Cyrene listens intently. So that's how that would work. So what's the downside to this? Okay, most people get this, but what people I've noticed tend to not like or tend to not understand is that if I've got something written on my character sheet, then they're used to it kind of always applying. But in Fate, this tempted by shiny things doesn't apply to this roll unless you have a fate point to give to the game master in order to evoke its effect right there. So that's why the fate points tell you how much influence you can have, because having just the right thing on your character sheet doesn't matter if you don't have the fate point to invoke it and to have it therefore cause its effect. And I found some people don't like that if I'm, have the aspect, greatest swordsman in Gondor, if you're playing the Middle Earth or something, greatest swordsman in Gondor. Well, if you don't have a fate point, then being the greatest swordsman in Gondor isn't going to apply any mechanical effect to the game when you are fighting if you are out of fate points. And some people do not like that perhaps greatest swordsman in Gondor should have a permanent effect. Declaring a story detail. This is another way that you can use a fate point. Sometimes you want to add a detail that works to your character's advantage in a scene. For example, you might use this to narrate a convenient coincidence, like retroactively having the right supplies for a certain job. Oh, of course I brought that along. Showing up dramatically appropriate moment, or suggesting that you and the NPC you just met have a mutual client in common. To do this, you'll spend a fate point. You should try to justify your story details by relating them to your aspects. GMs, you have the right to veto any suggestions that seem out of scope or ask the player to revise them, especially if the rest of the group isn't buying in. This is also a point of contention among many players, because you're actually creating some type of detail about the game world. And ordinarily, in other RPGs, a player would not really have that much control over the game world. That's the purview of the game master. But here, Fate is designed with a bit more collaboration in mind. So I don't mind as much the idea that you are declaring a story detail about your own character. Like this idea that, oh, do I have something? Oh, of course I did. Retroactively, you might say, oh, yes, I did bring that along with me. Here's the fate point, and now I've got that, and that's going to help me out here. If you are trying to declare something about the world that's not having to do with your character, I do have a little bit more of a problem with that, and I think other people do too. Now, some people don't, but when you're reading this kind of stuff online, some people really question how much control the player should have over the world. But it's a small detail. It does cost a fate point. So Zerd the Arcane gets captured by his friends, by some tribesfolk from the Sargoth wilds. The three heroes are unceremoniously dumped before the chieftain, and Amanda describes the chieftain addressing them in a strange guttural tongue. Ryan looks at his sheet and says, hey, if I haven't been there, I've read about it. This is his aspect on his character sheet, on my sheet. Can I declare that I've studied this language at some point so we can communicate? Amanda thinks that's perfectly reasonable to assume. Ryan tosses over a fate point and describes Zerd answering in the chieftain's own speech, which turns all eyes in the village, including those of his friends, on him in a moment of surprise. Ryan has Zerd look at his friends and say, books, they're good for you. So that's a way to not have to come up with all of your languages and things like that in the middle of, at character creation. We're trying to create a story here, and here is an instance where it would be helpful and dramatically appropriate for a character like this to be able to speak the language. So you use a fate point and you can do it. For this style of gaming, I don't have a problem with this kind of invocation of this aspect with a fate point. Now, here are compels. How are we doing here? Let's go over compels, and then looks like we might have to do another stream on fate, because there are more kinds of things that I want to talk about. I think compels are one of the most interesting parts of fate. It says, compels. Sometimes, in fact, probably often, you'll find yourself in a situation where aspects complicate your character's life and create unexpected drama. When that happens, the GM will suggest a potential complication that might arise. This is called a compel. Sometimes a compel means your character automatically fails at some goal, or your character's choices are restricted, or simply that unintended consequences cloud whatever your character does. You might negotiate back and forth on the details a little to arrive at what would be the most appropriate and dramatic for the moment. Once you've agreed to accept the complication, you get a fate point for your troubles. If you want, you can pay a fate point to prevent the complication from happening, but we don't recommend you do that very often. You'll probably need the fate point later, and getting compelled brings up drama and hence fun in your game's story. Players, you're going to call for a compel when you want there to be players, you're going to call for a compel when you want there to be a complication in a decision you've just made, if it's related to one of your aspects. GMs, you're going to call for a compel when you make the world respond to your characters in a complicated and dramatic way. So if you have something on your character sheet that looks like it's going to make the world a more difficult place for you, you can do this thing called a self-compel, and you can tell the game master, and like, all right, listen, I'm trying to do this, but I have this particular aspect that would probably make it harder for me. So I'm going to accept the complication, whatever happens because of that. In exchange, I get a fate point to use later on. That's part of the fate point economy right there. Likewise, the game master can notice that there's something on your character sheet that would complicate the situation, compel you, and you do have the option to not accept that compel if you have a fate point that you can give up and say, well, all right, listen, yes, I know that I've attracted by shiny things. I think that was one of the things that was used already. So the situation might be, I see some gold over there, or a golden statue, and you're very tempted by shiny things, so you're going to go over there and try to steal that statue, the game master says. And the player can say, yeah, that does sound like something I would do because I'm tempted by shiny things. I'm going to go over there and probably complicate my life in the story by trying to go and steal that thing. Or you could say, no, I'm going to try to overcome my urges, resist my urges. I'm going to pay a fate point, and I'm not going to have that. I'm not going to have to go and steal that. The reason that some people don't like this, one of the reasons that I like it is because another way of handling something like a disadvantage or something that's going to make things more complicated for your character is something like disadvantages in GURPS, right? So GURPS is a point-based system, and you've got all of these advantages for your character, and they cost points. So you're going to get like 150 points to create your character, and you can put good things on your character sheet and things that are going to make things easier for you, and those will cost you points. But if you want to get a few points back, then you can have some kind of major disadvantage or a minor disadvantage for less points. But you could choose that your character has only one arm or something, right? Okay, so that's going to be a disadvantage to the character, and then you're going to get some points back. First of all, that does require a lot of accounting and work in character creation. Like, it takes a long time to create a GURPS character, especially, some people say, well, I'm an expert at it and I can do it rather quickly, and that's fine. Maybe you can, but especially if you've got a lot of people who aren't as familiar with that as you are, and you're all sitting around the table, it can take a lot of time for everybody to sit there and create GURPS characters. And working with advantages and disadvantages and things like that is definitely one of the reasons. So that's one way to handle it. But then, of course, because you've got those disadvantages on your character sheet in GURPS, the game master can therefore use them against you, because that's why you're getting the points back for them. But first of all, I would say there's actually no guarantee those disadvantages are going to come up in the game. And I talked about that. There's a video I've got on this channel called, like, Are Point-Based Systems Really Balanced Anyway? And I basically make the argument that even though a game like GURPS tries really hard to say, okay, this is balanced, this is fair, because we've given every player 150 points to build their character. You could have whatever skills, advantages, disadvantages, blah, 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 that you want. That seems fair. It seems balanced. But on the other hand, it still might not be, because you're not really sure what is actually going to come up in the game that you're playing. Because if you've got some kind of disadvantage that never comes up in the game, you basically got free points, right? And likewise, if you bought some type of advantage and then that never comes up or has an opportunity to be useful during the game, you also are at a disadvantage. Or you never got to use that advantage, and so you paid the points for nothing. This kind of system with the compels ensures that when the thing, you're getting the advantage, you're getting the fate point right there as something is actually happening right there at the game. So you're not having to worry about things that are disadvantageous that never come up, or likewise advantageous but never come up, because you're getting the benefit right there at the table. That speeds along character creation, because we don't have to do all the counting in the background. And then here, you're getting the advantage, the fate point, when the disadvantage actually matters. Now, I think what people don't like about this, or some people don't like about this, is that they feel like the player should be in complete control of the character at all times. And it's going to be the player who decides whether or not you go over there and try to steal that statue because you're attracted to shiny things. I disagree with that. I mean, I understand what Fate is trying to do. I understand the argument that the player must be in control of the character at all times. But on the other hand, if you want that, then you shouldn't have something like a disadvantage. Because even in GURPS, you can have self-control roles. Instead of having a fate point mechanic, if you've got some kind of disadvantage where you are a kleptomaniac, for instance, and so you obviously compulsively steal things, that's telling you that your character, you're going to be playing your character as, a thief, a compulsive thief all the time. But you can modify that disadvantage, more accounting, with a self-control role that says, well, how often can I actually control myself if I need to? And so that is also, taking the agency away from the player in that moment. Okay, I'm a kleptomaniac, so I've got to play it that way, or you should be playing it that way. And then, the game master could certainly point out, hey, there's that thing that you could go over there and steal. And if the character or the player says, no, I don't want to, in GURPS, they would roll against that self-control roll. And if they fail that, they've got to go over there and steal that thing. So there is, I think, enough in some RPGs where, yes, you may not be completely in control of your character. So because of decisions that you've made when you were creating that character, right? So, and every single Fate character is supposed to have disadvantages like that. One of them is called a trouble, which I really like the idea of. I don't know if we're going to get to talk about that this time. May have to talk about Fate some more in different streams. But every Fate character has to have a major trouble that is going to complicate their lives. And so you just have to accept that sometimes you're going to encounter the situation where your character is going to behave in some way, even if you as the player would rather them not. And I'm okay with that. So here is our example here. Down here, anyone at the table is free to suggest when a compel might be appropriate for any character, including their own. GMs, you have the final word on whether or not a compel is valid. And speak up if you see that a compel happen naturally as a result of play, but no fate points are awarded. When I was playing it, doing something like self-compels was something that I did quite a bit. Like if I noticed, oh, I'm like this, I would respond this way. And then the game master would be like, oh, yes, here you go. And then would also hand me a fate point. So then the game would go in that direction. But, I get that little bonus. Access Your Inner Light says, GURPS sounds a bit too complex. Well, to a lot of people, it is. We should probably do some live streams on GURPS because I think that it's actually underappreciated. I did a video on GURPS where I talked about how it could go open source because there is tons and tons of stuff in the GURPS books. It is definitely rules heavy. It's very crunchy. To me, and I used to love it. I mean, and I still do like it. If you're into a really crunchy game, it is a really good one. But like I said, to me today, getting together for 2 or 3 hours, I want as much adventure and action punched in as I possibly can to that. Sometimes that may not be GURPS, but I now think about those GURPS books primarily as a game master's toolkit because there are all these different options in GURPS. And the people who primarily are willing to go through all of those and pull out the options that are right in order to create the right feel for a particular game world are the game masters. And so it'd be really great, I think, if GURPS were more open source or there were a more permissive license for it to be able to let people who really do want to be able to dig into all of that, set up all the rules for the world and so forth, and then publish out basically a handbook for a particular world that just has the options necessary for playing in that world. I think we'd be able to get a lot more use out of GURPS. And I think that would be a benefit for RPGs because you'd be able to customize that so much for different worlds. But Steve Jackson Games isn't doing that. So here is our example here. Landon has the aspect manners of a goat. He is attending the annual ball in Ichtheria with his friends, courtesy of the royal court. Amanda tells the players, as you're milling about, a sharply dressed young lady catches Landon sticking out of the crowd. She observes him for a while, then goes to engage him in conversation, obviously intrigued by how different he looks among all the stuffy nobles. She turns to Lenny. What do you do? Lenny says, well, I guess I ask her to dance and play along and see what I can find out. Amanda holds up a fate point and says, and this is going to go wrong, given Landon's excellent command of... And is that going to go wrong, given Landon's excellent command of courtly etiquette? Lenny chuckles and replies, yeah, I presume Landon will offend her pretty quickly, and that'll get complicated. I'll take the fate point. Amanda and Lenny play a bit to figure out just how Landon puts his foot in his mouth, and then Amanda describes some of the royal guard showing up. One of them says, you might want to watch out for how you speak to the High Duchess of Ichtheria, Outlander. Lenny shakes his head. Amanda grins the grin of the devil. So I think that's a great example of this kind of situation. The manners of a goat. If that's an aspect on your character sheet, I've got the manners of a goat, then in exactly this kind of situation where you've got to dance with the Duchess, you know that things are going to go wrong. So you get the fate point in return, but now things are messed up. David May says, GURPS is the most realistic RPG system out there. There's a simplified version for fantasy called Dungeon Fantasy. Yes, that's true. Let's talk about that for a moment because we are coming up. I think I'm going to hold off on the rest of Fate. I've got some other things to talk about it because, like I said, I'm trying to talk through this because I'm like, I think about this game a lot, but there are some things in it that are still not quite right. So I think probably another live stream on Fate is probably going to be a good idea. But David May says GURPS is the most realistic RPG out there. There's a simplified version called Fantasy, called Dungeon Fantasy. Yep. And I got that. So, for instance, sometimes Steve Jackson Games does do that for internally. Like, take the entire GURPS system that's over here, but then you don't need the whole GURPS. You don't need stuff about, like, being in spaceships if you're playing a fantasy game. Well, I guess it could be Spelljammer, but generally for fantasy games, you don't need, like, rules on spaceships and stuff. So you could go through and you could strip out all of the stuff that you don't need just for playing fantasy games, and then you could package it kind of standalone. So Steve Jackson Games did this for Dungeon Fantasy, which is designed for dungeon crawling and so forth. And so if you're trying to just play a dungeon crawling game, there's no reason to have all of your players, when you're trying to go through rules and character creation and all of that, go through all the stuff for starships and have to skip by all of that. You can just, like, for instance, right here. Here is its book for adventurers, for creating adventurers in Dungeon Fantasy right here. So they scaled that down. Whoa. They scaled down the character creation process by having, templates and things like that, like character classes that are already designed. So, here's your main character's book, and then here's your Dungeon Fantasy book. And so I like that approach. I do like that. And I wish that they had a license that would allow more people to publish things like this that were specific to different worlds and different genres and things like that. Let the people who are really knowledgeable about GURPS and like going through all of that go ahead and create more simplified kinds of rules for that, and then publish those out. And that's what I think. All right. Anything else we should mention here at the end here? Let's see. Check my notes here. We're looking at Fate Core. We may look at Fate again. There are a couple of different varieties of Fate. The Fate Condensed, and then also the Fate, I forget what the name of it is, that has just the approaches rather than skills and things like that. So I'd like to look at those as well, because they are somewhat more simplified from Fate Core. And I think in some ways have better ideas, or better ideas for certain things. All right. Well, as always, I appreciate your hanging out with me. I hope that everyone has enjoyed this, had your coffee, had your tea, had whatever it is, enjoyed a little bit of chatting about RPGs and fantasy in the morning, whether you're watching live or if you come by and watch the replay later on. I really appreciate your being here. Let's go out. I got writing to do in RPG stuff and in the worlds. Maybe I should start actually writing the stories since it's NaNoWriMo. So let's go be productive today and enjoy ourselves. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye for now. Later.